I'm not going to talk much about his life because it was extremely peripatetic. He lived here a couple of years, there a couple of years. Restless in almost all forms of living out your life. We've now stepped out of the Hudson River School with him. He's a man apart. There are a few other later 19th century artists who in England and in the US, he group with him in a group that subsequently are called tonalist artists because they're interested in something, as you can tell from that word, is more related to art than to the landscape. In saying goodbye to the Hudson River School, I should say that it's only around 1875 when his career is flourishing, Innes's career is flourishing, that the Hudson River School got its name. And that was a really disparaging name given by a subsequent artist and critic saying, oh, those are just provincials just doing that area around the Hudson River. So that whole project, you would say in modern language, I guess, of glorifying the land, using those pictures as an exposition of the American destiny and destination, which was to conquer and civilize all of this continent, starting with that area in the east, had come to an end. Now, for Innes, one reason that he's worth bringing out, there are people, of course, who consider him one of the greatest of the 19th century artists. He's just not a typical 19th century artist. And he is one who lived in Montclair for about the last decade of his life, when his work was at its most transcendent. He was living here. He had very little art education. He grew up he was born in Newburgh, and his father was a grocer. He sort of discounted what kind of training he had in art, but friends of his said that he went around lugging a book with him all the time as a kid, this book that was pictures of European landscape painters. Now that sounds almost too good to be true, but there's a truth in that, is that he's not really educated by any of the Hudson River School artists, nor did he have much art education at all. He looked at those pictures again and again and again, and the thing that sets him apart immediately and causes him to have difficulty, well, he has other reasons for difficulty, getting his career going, was that his orientation was toward the art of Europe, not toward the art of America. This is just a black and white of a painting by his son, who then became an artist as well, showing George Innes painting in Montclair in his studio outside his house. I don't know if the location of his house is known. I'm sure it's findable in the records. I know where Innes Place is.
It was off of Grove Street around Columbus Avenue.
Right, and then there's an Innes Place, which is over by the hospital, but that's just a name in honoring him.
Where his son was listed. Yes.
And the Montclair Art Museum has 20-some paintings by him, plus drawings, plus his artist supplies. And this is one of the great collections of works by Innes that covers the whole span of his career. But he was a prodigiously prolific artist. He did like about 1,000 paintings, which I can tell you right away, they're not going to be those detailed sort of paintings that, say, Thomas Cole was doing or Asher Durand, because you couldn't turn out that many. if you also suffered periodically from illness, as he did, and irritability, which he always had too, both physical and psychological irritability. So he had little snippets of art training, and he sort of discounted, I think it was like 2 months with one person, a couple months with someone else, but he had epilepsy when he was young, and that also limited how much formal education he had. I think he went to the Newark Academy for maybe 3 or 4 months, not even a full year. So he has a really spotty, disrupted background. But underneath all of that was, from the time he was a child, he wanted to be a painter. His father, of course, the same story as with Monet, whose father was a grocer. Father wanted him to go in the family business. No, he wanted to paint. And he did get a few paintings accepted into the National Academy of Design's annual exhibition. They were fairly much ignored. And then he went to get his own education. Where did he go? Well, he like the others, he went to Italy, but he only was in Italy for a very short time, partly because of a dust up when he went to some public ceremony where the Pope was there and he refused to take off his hat. So the French guards knocked off his cap and there was some brouhaha, and he and his wife and young child were sent out of Italy. So he came back, and he never really was drawn to Italian art. Here is something he did while in Italy, or maybe once he got home from Italy, one of his sort of early paintings. How would you know, class, that his orientation was not toward the Hudson River School artists who were around him and also at the National Academy, but that his interest was in European art? Look at the format of that picture. Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. He's gone right back to Claude Lorrain in the 17th century. That's the kind of image that he would have been seeing in that book that he was toting around with him. There you are, distant, misty mountains, neatly framed in the foreground, a kind of a foreground barrier that also creates a frame there, and an idealized, idyllic landscape, just the sort of thing that Claude Lorrain did. Now this is Thomas Cole, when Thomas Cole was just starting out and in Italy, and he did this one of the Arch of Nero. Why I brought this in now is that to suggest there's a fundamental difference in the way Innes is going to go at it. Part of it is probably because he lacked the training. He did not have someone saying, use this brush, this is how you arrange this color, you work this up here, you do it in this procedure. That he was largely finding his own way through looking at other paintings and rubbing shoulders with them. But look at Thomas Cole here. This is the Arch of Nero. It's really enjoying, capitalizing on the fact that this is Roman ruins. You know, there's antiquity. That's the lure of Italy, the prestige of ancient Italy, and the very fine detail. The flecks on the leaves in the foreground, the resting animals. There's even someone on horseback going through the arch. And then there's part of an aqueduct in the background, and it goes back and back and back. That interest in the particulars of nature. Yeah.
Was Innes self-supporting when he went to Italy?
I think so.
So
Because
enough recognition at that point.
minimal, but he was also scrabbling to get commissions and arguing about how much money he should be paid for painting. So finances he was skimped pretty much. Yeah.
Maggie, I have a question. If we were to see this in
Yeah.
person, would the colors be like that or?
This is quite close, and I was going to ask, we're doing it again. I was going to ask, has anybody seen this? Because this used to be in the Newark Museum. They sold it, but for a little bit less than a million, I guess. And it's now on display in the Philadelphia Museum. See, I didn't give you the name of this painting. It's the Roman Aqueduct. Do you see it?
No, not really.
And actually, more accurate, it's a bit of a Roman aqueduct. And it's about a little bit more than 3.5 feet high. I was reading something that pointed out this is his characteristic way of going at the world, his own way, not the predicted way. That he utterly downplays that. I'm in Rome. Okay, so there's a bit of an aqueduct, you know, that's what's left over. Who cares? But he is working on the kind of precision in technique initially. And he came back and he had another trip in a couple of years. And he did get, in the mid 1850s, a very nice commission, which again has more of a connection to the Hudson River School, partly in the choice of subject because it is the American landscape. This one's just called the Lackawanna Valley from 1855. And I'll give you the size of this one. It's about a little bit more than 4 feet across. It's in the National Gallery in Washington. He was given a commission by the owner of the Lackawanna and Western and some other Lackawanna, Allegheny and Western Railroad to do pictures that would advertise the route of the new train. Many of these landscape paintings, not a majority, but many of them have connection with the railroad because they are emphasizing destinations or the route of this new mode of transport. And this one is shows the new roundhouse in the background, which is, you can see, awfully big. Well, this was an innovative structure. So the commission stressed that had to be explained. But you've seen a landscape quite similar to this. Of course. Now, I'm not going to say it's based on Thomas Cole's Oxbow, because by now this is just a cliched type where there's something with a viewer, either a viewer in the center or off toward the left, something in the foreground on the left, and then you look off at the right at a distant landscape. And so that's what Cole has done here. Remember, this is one in which Cole is, to some degree, lamenting what the progress of civilization is, that it's destroying the land, and that he prefers the tempestuous wilderness, which is still here in storm. And the artist looks up at you there. Please, so, well, let's take the full one first. So there's not the abrupt shift from foreground to distance, but you have that moving off into the distance. The train is much more prominent here. Those in that wedge, those little triangular forms, those are tree stumps. So here the issue, if we were thinking of Cole, is this a lament of the destruction, or is this here this, oh yeah, this is the way you move ahead. You just clear the land. And the tree behind him. This is a part of a painted reproduction of it, so forget what's down in the lower left corner. But as far as I know, it's a fairly good reproduction. And we're looking at that tree. His contemporaries did not like looking at trees like that. They repeatedly entered his woolly trees. They're just woolly. And what does that mean? They don't show the precision of what type of tree it is. It does not have that minute accuracy which Americans prized so much, especially in the era of botany, scientific understanding of nature, where patrons would criticize an artist and say, you didn't have this tree quite correct, or one of Duran's patrons doing that, you don't have this quite accurate, next time, the lichen should be like this. They had that, the factuality, the materiality that they really relished. And Americans have often been disparaged for having that as a kind of pragmatic temperament anyway. Mm-hmm.
Was he interested in the idea of progress comes at a price at all? Because if the tree's a woolly tree, I noticed when you have a view that there were all those tree stumps and it was one tree. It's almost as though it's a symbol of trees being knocked down for progress.
It seems that kind of this world grounded question is not the sort of thing that interested him. And in this, you can maybe say a woolly tree is the fact that he didn't have that training, or he didn't have the temperament for that kind of minute work. But it's much more that he's just not interested. He wants something different in a picture than telling a story. Now, here he has to tell a story because that's the nature of the patronage. That's what these are. But he's going to be after something else. And the lovely one that's up at Ma'am, because this is a rather blurry illustration, I can just really blithely say, well, just go walk up the street and spend some time looking at this in all the detail. And you see, so it's from that same series. And here, one of the questions the docents know to ask of kids groups when you're taken through is to say, do you see anything you don't expect in here? You see where the train is?
Way in the back, way in the middle back.
Way over to the right, curving along. You know, you're looking at the Delaware Gap there, and so there's that interest in geology. This is going to prove that this river has eroded through the hills, but you can just see the steam from the steam engine as it's moving toward us out of the. So think of this: how much, again, an independent man he is. Does this well advertise the route for the railroad magnate who has ordered these?
Maggie, I just have one very quick story.
Yeah.
So when kids are taking kids through, one of the kindergarten wanted to show off that he read all these wonderful words. He said, and in the foreground you see all those bushes. And I said, that's great. And way in the back between those two mountains, what do you call that? He's thinking and thinking, and he said, the 5 ground.
And there is one more for this. Yeah, that's very good. This one also, the Delaware Valley. This one is in London in the National Gallery. Again, this moves the steam engine way off to the side here. You can hardly see the tracks at all. More the raft, the commercial down in the water is more significant. And interestingly, the rainbow. Now that's more attuned to the Hudson River, the sense of progress, the divinely ordained burgeoning of industry in this country, and those few cows. One of these three, well, not the one that's it, the first of the last of these, evidently the patron didn't like, because the story is that toward the end of his life, when Innes was in Mexico, he went into a shop and found one of these hanging up on the wall. And he bought it back for not very much money and kept it for a while. So this one is simply called A Road to the Farm. Now this is a decade later, 1862. I think this is a good reproduction. I think you can maybe see better why these are called woolly trees, because you don't see leaves. You see masses. The foreground tree on the left, the highlights pick out leaves more or less. But likewise the grass. Remember this Asher Durand? Was that crystalline clarity. And that message that you're moving toward the light. There's that sort of divine quality in that, and the detail of the tree. So for an owner of this, who sometimes is having to stay at work, you can look at this and just recollect all those times you've enjoyed being out in nature. And this is strictly American nature. This doesn't appeal to that at all. In fact, where does this go? It goes to horizon and stops. Look at those clouds. Do those look like clouds? Are those wisps floating overhead? No, they're clots. Because he has seen an art to which now he truly responds as contemporary. And that's French contemporary painting from the Barbizon school. It's the group that came into prominence just prior to Impressionism. The artists who worked in the Fontainebleau forest and worked from life. They mainly did sketches from life and sometimes would finish the paintings in the studio. But they were much more taking immediate impressions of what the colors were in the light, and they use a much sketchier technique because they want to show that instantaneity of the way they are reacting and the way they're putting it in. So this, and to express their emotion, their excitement in it, because it's a given that brushwork can express emotion. You sense the person at work, the speed at which they're working, how patient they are, just the way they go about it. And this is what moved him. This is what inspired him, not American art. And in the criticism of him and his works that were in exhibitions, the opprobrium cast on him because he's not looking at nature. He is looking at the art of Europe. He is being overwhelmed by art from outside instead of looking at the reality of the world he lives in. So it sort of explains, emphasizes what the Hudson River School, what its purpose was. So he did some works that are sort of quasi-Hudson River, quasi-Barbizon. This is this particular landscape is the Catskill Mountains from 1870. You notice something different as you get beyond that first hill and then you move on to the mountain in the distance? Do you see that light in between? And the grass and the forms, it's not just the mountains are going to become woolly. Things are just now smoothed out. They lose their specificity, and even though, oh, there's a church, there's a village, those things are there. It's evident, it's vanishing, that reality. Now, I'm going to, of course, this is back to Frederick Church, and this is around 1850, but I'm going to squint to a couple from the end of his life and then come back again, because he too did some Niagara Falls because he needed commissions, he needed money. And this is one that's owned by the museum up the street, but that's the falls. And I have it in a pinkish color, but it's closer so that you can see it. From the colors, you know that that's a man and a woman. Their features, the costumes, you really can't make out. The water is not water, it's streaks of color, isn't it? It's motion. The distant shore, hardly visible. Or these are small paintings. He did them on wood panels for sort of easy sale. And then this is what it looked like around the river at this time, by this time toward the end of the century, because they're harnessing the power for electricity. So these are all the manufacturers along the edge of the river in the town of Niagara itself. And he did this painting of Niagara, the town. What are those flecks of white in the foreground? Really?
No.
Probably. So from the plume of smoke, we know that's a factory. What's all that other scumbled mix, a little bit of blackish all along there? Can you distinguish those as buildings? No, it's an area of color. So we're going to see how he got to that. This one. This is when things begin to change in what he's doing. His desire always was to show the essence of things rather than just their outer experience. And let me just, I've got a couple of quotes I want to give you here from someone about the time of the Lackawanna Valley. In a New York newspaper, this was written about his work. It is scarcely credible that an artist who is possessed of undoubted talents and who has produced fine works should so prostitute his ability as to paint like this. One of these pictures is a mass of green cheese dotted with sheep. Most people imagine these sheep to be cows. In the other, Innes has striven to give the effect immediately after a thunderstorm. He's made a conglomeration of soft tallow and an astonishing rainbow. Mr. Innes, please lay off such freaks and paint as we know you can paint. Thus to trifle with yourself and the public is more than foolish, it's criminal. That's the reaction to the disappearance of detail. And this is what he's then moving into. I'll give you several quotes by him here. The purpose of a painting was to clothe an idea with a form fitted to give it a material or physical comprehension. So he's moving into art that's metaphysical and out of the purely physical, which if you ask me is what a challenge for painting. What is more challenge than in a painting representing the physical world with the physical object through which you want to express the non-physical. And that's the challenge he puts for himself. And he says, the true end of art is not to imitate a fixed material condition, but to represent a living motion. He becomes in the 60s, and it's just beginning here, to be interested in the ideas of Swedenborg, the metaphysical thinker from late 18th, early 19th century, who'd had a career as a fine scientist, and then in his 50s started to have visions. He was considered a Christian theologian. Innes's mother was a devout Methodist, but he doesn't really belong to a sect. He is more They say he's more interested in the theology, the theology in religion rather than the sort of sectarian faith aspects of it. But what Swedenborg was interested in was, where is reality? What's the true reality? It's not things. It's an essence in things that gets expressed through things, but it's not the things themselves. Now, how do you show that? I see everyone, what? It's slightly different than just saying that it's the God-given something. It permeates everything in the world. Every tree, every blade of grass starts with this essence and then ultimately takes form of a tree or a blade of grass. So he's going to seek ways to represent that. And here he just begins to move into, this is when he's back in Italy, Lake Nemi, a favorite site since the ancient Romans. It's a lake and a crater. It's really deep, deep set in the hills. So the surface is always pretty glassy. You know, there's no wind ever stirs it up. So it's just a beautiful, reflective, tranquil place. And there's a person of trade, age, no way to know, just a garbed person walking down a hill. There are birds for Jeff, a few birds in the sky. Yeah?
What is the timeline here? How does this interact with early Impressionism? And would he have been exposed to that?
He wouldn't have been exposed. He was exposed to more Barbizon work because some dealers were beginning to bring that to New York. And then in a couple of years, Impressionist comes, but you see what's very interesting, because it's also moving away from the standard way of showing reality. So there, you can sort of sense that all across these cultures, things are moving. And you can say, like, this metaphysical thing. This is Henry James in philosophy. This is the late 19th century. This is when going out to seances was very popular. That sense that there is something more than new steam engines going down the tracks, that very material world. And so he's working toward a way to represent that.
Maggie, I really don't know what the Barbizon school is.
Okay, there were a group of French landscape artists who, in the 1850s mainly, went largely to the forest of Fontainebleau, and they began to paint when they were right in front of the scene. Instead of just taking a sketch and then going back to the studio, they might do a little finishing in the studio, but they wanted the paintings to look like it's my immediate, this is not a perfected something. This is my feeling about it. And there are moody skies and evening sunsets. It's just.
Is it the same as on planet air, or it's not?
Yes, it's outdoors, but it's also indicating through this kind of rapid technique that it's like, I'm expressing myself rapidly and working rapidly, conditions are changing rapidly. So it's all more contingent. Yeah. Yeah? Marty?
The two white flecks, sort of in the center mid part. Did he just put, I can't see if they have any definition, or is this something related to the two white flecks at Niagara? But
Well, no, here, these are birds. So that's sort of suggesting this space. But you know, and then there's a bird down closer to the water.
I see the one now.
But if you look, say, just look at an area, the foreground and the grass, these are like go up to Mount Carmel, you see You see little dark forms, those must be weeds, little grays, but you get close, those are just strokes of paint. So they're just on the edge of being perceptible because he's trying to show the state of flux where things are real and not real, and he's showing something that's really there, but it's not really there because it's the spirit behind it is what he wants to get. And one of the things that also happens as this goes on is that you see the formal layout of the painting becomes more obvious. So you see the way the line of the road and then that wall that makes a nice curve. And then you follow other curves and you begin to see the whole painting as flat. You can diagram this. You can lay out the shapes. You notice that at least as fast as you see, oh, I see that over there on that hill. I see this here. You're looking at it as a painting while you're looking at it as a scene. And that's a really tricky thing. The metaphysical artists like Mondrian, who do it by just showing abstract shapes, that's much easier. Or Hilma af Klint, because trying to get that across, still tying it to the visible reality is like the challenge that he fought with.
Maggie, would that be the style of clothes at the time? Because it almost
I don't think so.
clerical.
Yeah, I think this is clerical. Now, but when you look up there along the wall, do you see how he doesn't have edges? This is deliberate because he doesn't want to show that palpable, touchable reality. Now, this is a dark image. I'll show it to you lighter and then we'll come back to this one better. Just so that you see a little bit more. It's just called the monk. So he's in a grove of fruit trees. And then we're looking beyond.
This almost looks African.
It's interesting. I prefer Japanese.
And Japanese art was coming into this country. So he is reacting to that. And Whistler was doing the same thing, the same kind. Whistler in England was involved in a lawsuit when I think it was Oscar Wolf claimed that he just thrown a pot of paint at the surface because where's the object? I just seen color. This is so changing the nature of what paintings were from what they had been. So don't you just see this now as if I gave you a piece of paper and pencil, you could outline these, you could diagram this. You got that line of umbrella palms going across the top, then another horizontal of that, the orange line of the clouds, then trees some more, then the fence just marking down. Is that something in the distance and something close? No. Well, the reality is in the painting, that's not true. Things are not in the distance and close. They are at the top or the bottom of the picture. And now you're seeing them at the top or the bottom of the picture. Look, even with the umbrella pines, they have a more rounded surface at the top. So he's reduced them to that same flow of horizontal lines. Now, this is the same time that Kensett is doing these paintings in his cottage off Darien, Connecticut. And since these are the paintings that were in his studio when he died in 1872, we don't have any idea what he was up to with them or what people thought about them at the time, because no patron had taken any of these. But there's something similar happening. Now, these are incredibly detailed. You know how I feel about these, that these to me are just enchantment. That's the most distant horizon. As soon as you can go back on and on, the most minute boats back there. And then, of course, if you just turned your head moving to the right, you'd see the infinite expanse of the sea. Go to Europe before you see more land. But that's still combined with that very meticulous detail. So he's trying for something too there, but quite different. Well, here's the two other pencils that were like that. This one. With that. Now these are all done that same summer, so I can't say this is the last one he did, and therefore it's the most abstract. But he is playing with that elimination of objects into something that's more like a painting, not a painting of something. Yet, simultaneously, he is showing the whole infinite extent of the world, can't you? You can smell the sea air, you can take in all the sense impressions. I don't think there's any sense impression I carry away from something like that, do you? Or he was doing the same things. And then when that one I showed you with it, where he's the gremlin, here we're talking about this, the writing about these are as if these are deeply serious, almost sacred things, presenting the glory of the world. And then look at the way he's playing around with this. He's laughing at what he's doing. I am so happy that you can just go up to the museum, because it's extremely difficult to get good reproductions. Because later Innuses are so popular. If you go and you Google Innus, you have to go through 3 or 4 screens before you get to something that's not a reproduction on a towel, a reproduction for the back of your phone, a copy for X amount of money, or this cheap copy this way. They're all commercial products. And it's frustrating as can be, because the kind of graininess that you see in this is also quite true of the paintings when you see them. This is just called a summer landscape. And we're now in the 1880s. This is that people think of, this is the essence of Innes's paintings. His son told about this. His father once was struggling with the painting, and then in frustration, he took a cloth and wiped across it. And when he wiped it off, he said, "That's what I wanted." Because that gave that sense of haze, of nothing quite pinned in place. And he says, I want everything watery. I want streams. I want clouds. I want brooks. I want everything in flux, because that's the spirit. So forms are in flux. They're not really there. They're coming and going, because that's where their vitality is. So, see, these are not landscapes in a way. But then look at the composition. Trees, 1/2. See how I place it off? You could just block it out like a Mondrian. Center bright green. Well, those are trees in the distance, but really that's just a bluer color across the center of the picture. It's his house in Montclair. Do you see there's one person in there?
See what?
There's a person in here. This is not meant to be a puzzle, but this is just the way people are also things that are coming and going.
Oh, yes.
Mhm. Yes.
For the houses.
Yeah.
That's over, I
Right.
think.
And then when you look at the snow, it looks in some places like snow, in other places it's clearly dabs of white paint. It's both and, either or. As opposed to this one in the museum, this winter scene. You see, there he still has a story. The story is not clear, but you know there is a narrative quality in here. That's a person walking, whether he's walking toward you or walking away. That can be still a matter of dispute. But there also that paint is built up on the surface. Near the village. That sky is every bit as tangible as the grass. Because it's just paint. Almost bisected, both horizontally and vertically. Try how big this one is. Yeah, it's big. This is 6 feet across. Now that's very large to be looking at something like this, right? This is in the National Gallery in Washington. And this is one of his very last works, The Home of the Heron.
Oh, the heron, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a heron. The heron.
Heron, and it's about 4 feet across. The front of the picture, of course, that's what the grass, the ground is, the most material thing. If you walked in, you would touch. Paint has been scraped off the paint. There's nothing to touch. He considered the dawn and dusk are the times when you could most get a sense of that, the real reality, instead of this sham of physical existence. And the last one I brought in just as a Martin Heed's Florida landscape was from the same time. Oh, well, so let me just, here we're going to get, this is what we're going to get next time. Physicality in the extreme. Yes, we're going to go west. Just for a little bit, and then into the photographs made by the survey teams who were to map the West and to invite people to come. So have a good vacation. And more in the real world than these images are.